Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's the breath before a storm, the stillness before truth strikes like lightning across a darkened sky. In the lavish Warwick estate, on the edge of Beverly Hills, Clara Monroe stood before the mirror, smoothing the emerald silk of her gown, hiding the quiet cracks in her heart. 4 months pregnant, she carried both the flutter of new life and the weight of unspoken secrets swirling through her millionaire husband Julian's glittering world. Soon the dutiful wife would transform into the woman who dared to expose the Warwick family's deception, proving that even the softest voice can ignite a fire strong enough to change everything. Clara Monroe stood still in the vast expanse of her dressing room, where the glow of a grand crystal chandelier scattered flecks of gold across the rich green silk of her gown. The dress hugged her form, highlighting the gentle curves of a woman 4 months into pregnancy, yet every smooth fold seemed to veil the fractures hidden deep within her soul. Her gaze lingered on her reflection, her blue eyes wide and searching an endless ocean, restless beneath the surface. The confidence she once wore so naturally was gone. In its place lingered a quiet unease, the kind that lived in the spaces between heartbeats. She caught her lower lip between her teeth, a small, familiar habit, as if the pressure might keep the tide of anxiety from breaking through. One hand drifted instinctively to her belly, where life stirred softly, a tender reminder that her choices now carried weight far beyond herself. Beyond the door, Julian Warwick's footsteps rang against the polished wood floor, quick and decisive, each one striking like the beat of a drum calling her to attention. "We're late, Clara," he said, his voice slicing through the air, cold, precise, with a tone that made her stomach knot. Julian, her husband, was the picture of success in the public eye. That dazzling smile splashed across magazine covers, a wardrobe of flawless suits, and speeches that commanded attention as he spoke of his thriving real estate empire. Yet here, within the walls of their home, he was a different man, aloof, calculating, and distant. A man whose gaze no longer reached her heart. The mansion in Beverly Hills, with its immaculate white facade and meticulously groomed rose garden, stood as a monument to luxury. Outside, the crimson petals danced gently in the breeze, whispering the illusion of beauty and perfection. But Clara knew better. Behind the glittering glass and perfect symmetry lay shadows. She felt them like a sixth sense, sharp and insistent. She'd seen the signs. Julian's hushed, late-night phone calls taken in the farthest corner of a room, the drawn-out business trips explained with vague excuses, the way Vanessa, his assistant, avoided meeting her eyes whenever she appeared at the office unannounced. Each detail, small but precise, cut into her like shards of glass. Once, Clara's gift for noticing details had been her pride. Before her marriage, she'd built a promising career in interior design, able to spot the subtlest flaw in a space, a wall color just a shade too warm, a frame hanging the slightest degree off. That same meticulous eye now turned inward on her life, and what it revealed made her shiver. The man she had married, the one who once looked at her with warmth and spoke of a golden future, had transformed into a stranger perfect on the surface, but with shadows spreading beneath. She smoothed a small crease on her gown, as though the motion could somehow smooth the chaos inside her chest. Her heart thudded with a question she couldn't quiet. Was she imagining it all, or was the truth already staring her down? Her hand rested again on her belly, cradling the fragile promise within, and she whispered silently, "I'll protect you, no matter what." But even as the words formed, they trembled with the weight of uncertainty. Julian's steps drew closer. Clara lifted her chin, meeting her reflection's gaze one last time. She summoned a smile, polished, practiced, and perfect, the same smile she had worn through countless galas and charity events. But beneath that elegant mask was a storm waiting to break. With a soft rustle of silk, she stepped from the room, moving toward a world she knew was on the brink of change. The quiet wife was almost gone. In her place was a woman who would no longer turn away from the secrets closing in. Beneath the golden glow of crystal chandeliers in the Four Seasons Hotel's grand banquet hall, the evening shimmered with opulence. Wine glasses clinked in soft harmony, sending out delicate notes like crystal bells. Clara Monroe, wrapped in an emerald silk gown that caught the light with every step, glided through the throng with a poised smile. Her crimson lips curved just enough, her handshake warm yet measured as she greeted investors. To the room, she was the epitome of refinement, the perfect wife to Julian Warwick, real estate mogul and master of charm. Yet behind the graceful facade, her heart fluttered unsteadily, as fragile as a leaf trembling in a sudden winter gust. Every smile was deliberate, every pleasantry a mask hiding the questions that had been gnawing at her for weeks. Clara's eyes missed nothing. It was instinct, now an ability honed back in her days as a designer, when the smallest imperfection in a room would leap out at her. She saw what others overlooked, glances that shifted too quickly, words that faltered mid-sentence, silences that seemed to swell unnaturally. Tonight, those signs felt sharper, more urgent. Across the room, Vanessa Reed, Julian's personal assistant, stood with a glass of white wine in hand. The pale liquid trembled faintly, disturbed by the slight shake in her fingers. Vanessa's gaze kept darting toward the balcony doors, restless and expectant, as though she were waiting for something or someone. The tension radiating from her was palpable, stretched tight like a string moments from snapping. When Clara approached a cluster of Julian's business associates, their laughter abruptly faded. Smiles remained, but the warmth drained from them, replaced by a stiffness she could feel in her bones. They avoided her eyes, and in that moment, she felt like a stranger at her own table, her chest constricted. Am I overthinking this? She wondered, but her intuition, the same voice that had never failed her, whispered otherwise. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Julian had been absent from the main table for some time. Her gaze swept over the crowd until she spotted him tall, dark-suited, slipping toward the balcony. That part of the room lay in shadow, the warm light of the chandeliers giving way to silver moonlight spilling through glass doors. The sight sent a chill down her spine, like cold water sliding between her shoulder blades. She could have stayed in place, could have continued playing her role, but her feet moved on their own. Every step echoed with her heartbeat, each beat a silent question. What am I about to see? She stopped before the balcony door, her palm resting on the icy handle. Through the glass, Julian's deep, familiar laugh reached her, once a sound that made her melt, now cutting clean and cold. It mingled with a woman's voice, low and confident, carrying a magnetic charm. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears as she eased the door open. A rush of night air swept in, scented faintly with the salt of the bay. There, under the moon's silver watch, Julian stood with his arms wrapped around Vanessa Reed. The assistant's scarlet dress blazed against the dimness, her golden hair catching the light. She leaned into him, her body language speaking a truth Clara didn't want to believe. Time seemed to slow, the moment crystallizing into a jagged shard. Pain lanced through her, quick and merciless, tearing through the careful image of their marriage. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body stayed rooted to the cold stone beneath her heels. Her mind turned to the life growing inside her. You can't break. Not now. Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms, grounding her in the physical sting. Vanessa's eyes met hers across the distance, not with guilt, but with a glimmer of challenge. Julian still hadn't noticed, his laughter ringing out in cruel contrast to the silence wrapping around Clara. In that moment, she knew this was not the end. This was the fracture that would awaken a different Clara, the woman who would no longer stand in the shadows, the one who would find her voice and use it. 3 months into her pregnancy, Isabella Reed had grown accustomed to her husband, Adrian Cross, treating her like nothing more than a display piece at lavish parties. But tonight, at the multi-million-dollar tech launch, the line was crossed. He slapped her right there in front of his mistress and the entire press corps. As the sting still burned on her cheek, a single, crystal-clear decision rang through her mind. If he was going to destroy her life, then she would burn to the ground the dark AI empire he had built through deceit. This was no longer just a story about a slap. It was a war to reclaim her voice. Clara Monroe stood motionless on the balcony of the Four Seasons Hotel, the night air wrapping around her with the mingled fragrance of jasmine and salt from the bay. The sweetness of the flowers felt almost mocking, a reminder that beauty can so easily disguise the rot beneath. Moonlight bathed her in silver, tracing the lines of her emerald silk gown, but the glow could not hide the heaviness crushing her chest. Every breath was an effort, each inhale a battle to keep from collapsing. Just a few steps away, Julian Warwick, her husband, her supposed partner, held Vanessa Reed in his arms. The trusted assistant he had once praised now clung to him with a familiarity that left no room for doubt. The sight cut through her like an icy blade, tearing apart the polished image of a marriage she had fought to protect. She wanted to run, she wanted to scream, but her body refused to move, her heels frozen to the cold stone beneath her. Her heart, cracked and bleeding, still beat with stubborn defiance. "Julian," she called, her voice clear and sharp enough to pierce the silence. He turned, his deep brown eyes flashing not with guilt, but irritation. There was no flicker of remorse, no falter in his stance. Vanessa stepped slightly back, yet her proximity to him remained intimate, her red dress blazing under the moonlight like a wound that refused to heal. Clara's lungs felt tight, the air thinning. She had asked herself countless times if her suspicions were unfounded. Now, the answer stood right before her. Julian's reply was cold and commanding. He told her to return inside, his tone dripping condescension, dismissing her as hysterical. But Clara stayed rooted, fists clenched so tightly her nails dug crescents into her palms. The physical sting was her anchor against the tidal wave inside. "I deserve the truth," she said. Her voice wavered, but it carried the weight of someone who would no longer be silenced. It was more than a question, it was a battle cry. But Julian offered no truth wrapped in kindness. Instead, his mask slipped, revealing a cruelty she had never seen so bare. His words lashed out, admitting to more than Vanessa, admitting to other women, other lies. Each sentence was another dagger, and she stood there, absorbing the blows in silence, the world around her collapsing into jagged shards. Her hand drifted to her belly, instinctively shielding the child she carried. "Our baby," she whispered, hoping to reach something human within him. But his answer came in a sneer. Then, without warning, his hand struck her. The slap cracked through the night like shattering glass. Pain seared her cheek as she stumbled. Gasps from nearby guests spilled onto the balcony, followed by the rapid clicks and flashes of phones capturing her humiliation. Clara's fingers brushed her stinging skin, but no tears fell. It wasn't strength that stopped them, it was necessity. She could not let him see her break. Not here, not now. Beneath the pain, fury rose, coiling with resolve. She thought of all the years she had been the perfect wife, biting her tongue, excusing his distance, convincing herself that endurance was love. But tonight, under the cold glow of the moon, she understood. Silence had been her prison, and this moment, this slap, was the key to her freedom. Her blue eyes hardened, no longer a calm sea but a gathering storm. Without another word, she turned from him, her heels clicking against the stone with the steady rhythm of a heart awakening. The crowd parted as she passed, their faces a blur of pity and curiosity. She ignored them all, pulling her phone from her clutch with trembling fingers. "Mom?" she whispered into the line when Eleanor answered from Seattle, her voice breaking. "I need you and Dad. Everything's falling apart." She drew a shaky breath, the sting on her cheek throbbing in time with her pulse. Somewhere behind her, the first videos of the Warwick scandal were already beginning to spread online, but she didn't care. All she knew was that in this moment of devastation, something inside her had ignited a small, steady flame. It was not born of vengeance, but of resolve, and it would not go out. Clara Monroe curled into the corner of the worn sofa in Lila Harper's modest San Francisco apartment, the soft amber light from a single table lamp casting uneven shadows across her tear-stained face. Mascara streaked in dark trails down her cheeks, her blue eyes swollen from hours of crying. Her hands rested protectively over the gentle curve of her stomach, holding on to the fragile life growing inside her, a small, flickering flame in the midst of a storm. The apartment's beige walls, the faint scent of brewed coffee, and the scattered stacks of books and newspapers felt a world away from the cold opulence of the Beverly Hills mansion. Here, among mismatched cushions and the comforting clutter of real life, Clara could finally breathe. Lila, with her untamed curls and energy that filled every room, had opened the door at 3 a.m. without a single question. She'd simply pulled Clara into a fierce hug, the kind that wordlessly says, "I've got you." Clara sat hunched, fingers intertwined, as the phone on the coffee table lit up over and over. Dozens of messages, news alerts, and headlines about the Warwick scandal flashed across the screen. She didn't open a single one. She didn't need to see the video of Julian's slap. She could still feel it, burning across her cheek. Every notification felt like another knife twisting in her chest. What do they see when they look at me? A victim? A fool? She didn't know. All she knew was that the carefully constructed world she'd once inhabited had crumbled into jagged pieces. Her thoughts returned to the child she carried. She pressed her palm against the borrowed cotton shirt, whispering silently, "I'll protect you, I promise." But under the promise lay fear that she might not be enough, fear of a future she couldn't yet see. She tried to banish the sound of Julian's cruel laughter, the way his hand had struck her, but the memory was etched too deeply. And yet, that pain had also awakened something, a flicker of resolve pushing back against the darkness. By morning, she was at San Francisco International Airport, scanning the crowd until she saw them, her father, Daniel, in his weather jacket, steady as the mountains, and her mother, Eleanor, wrapped in her favorite green scarf, eyes glistening with both worry and love. Clara rushed forward, collapsing into her mother's arms. "Mom," she whispered, choking back sobs. "I don't know what to do." The scent of lavender on Eleanor's scarf carried her back to childhood, to a time when every hurt seemed survivable. In a quiet corner of the terminal, Clara told them about the baby. Eleanor didn't gasp, didn't scold. She simply took her daughter's hand. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. Then, in a voice layered with memory, she revealed her own past, the escape from an abusive marriage, the fear that she would never be whole, and the man Daniel who proved love should never wound. Daniel's steady hand on Eleanor's shoulder was silent confirmation that some bonds could heal what was broken. Those words were a light cutting through the fog in Clara's mind. She thought of every time she'd stayed silent, every time she'd convinced herself Julian would change. Now, she knew the strength she needed was not in saving him, it was in saving herself. As the first golden light of dawn spilled across the city, Clara felt her baby stir, a reminder that hope still lived within her. Lila appeared with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, its steam curling gently in the air. "You'll get through this," she said, her voice like an anchor. Clara nodded, feeling warmth seep into her palms as she gripped the cup. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing: she was done being silent. Dear audience, take a deep breath, sip some water, and stay with me. The most gripping turns of this story are still ahead. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and drop a 1 if you're feeling every moment of Clara's journey. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains of Lila Harper's small San Francisco apartment, tracing pale gold lines over the worn wooden floor. On the couch, Clara Monroe sat curled into herself, her body still carrying the sting of Julian's slap, the echo of his venomous words, and the vivid image of betrayal on the Four Seasons balcony. Yet somewhere beneath the raw pain, something was shifting, quiet but resolute. It was the kind of determination that grows stubbornly in the cracks, like a blade of grass breaking through stone. She knew that escaping Julian Warwick and safeguarding the life inside her would take far more than grief or rage. It would require strategy, restraint, and deliberate moves made in silence, the way a hunter waits in shadow for the perfect moment. Across from her, Lila's warm, unwavering gaze held Clara steady. She clasped her hand and said with quiet certainty, "You need a plan." Together they reached out to Sarah Bennett, a formidable San Francisco attorney known for dismantling high-profile marriages with surgical precision. Sarah arrived, silver hair drawn back in a sleek knot, her steel-gray eyes assessing Clara not as a victim, but as a woman prepared to fight. "We'll need proof," she said evenly. "Not just of the harm he's done to you, but of what he's hiding in his business." That became Clara's path. She would have to re-enter the very place that had kept her gilded and caged, the Beverly Hills mansion where she had played the perfect wife for 5 long years. On a clear morning, with Julian away at the family's retreat in Lake Tahoe, Clara arrived at the wrought iron gates, the cool weight of the key pressing into her palm. The roses along the drive, once a comfort, were now reminders of the careful illusion she'd lived under. With a deep breath, she unlocked the gate. Her parents flanked her, Daniel guarding the doorway with quiet strength, Eleanor holding a canvas bag, her presence a steady anchor. Inside Julian's office, the air smelled of polished wood and leather. Clara went straight to the walnut desk that had been his command post. Her hands trembled but stayed sure, guided by years of subtle observation, the times he slammed his laptop shut, the muffled phone calls outside, the flicker of unease when she entered unannounced. In a locked drawer, she uncovered a hard drive, contracts signed by unfamiliar names, and a stack of encrypted emails. One by one, she passed them to Eleanor, who sorted them with practiced calm. Before leaving, Clara stepped into the master bedroom. The bed was neatly made, the closet immaculate. She took a few comfortable clothes, a framed family photo, and a wool blanket her grandmother had knitted for the baby. Pressing it to her chest, she felt its quiet promise that love, not cruelty, would shape her child's life. Outside, Daniel's eyes gleamed with pride. Eleanor squeezed her hand as they drove away, the crunch of gravel under the tires sounding like the first note of freedom. In the back seat, Clara held the bag of evidence close, her heartbeat steady. She didn't yet know the full reach of what she carried, but she knew these were the first steps toward a life where no one could silence her again. Later that morning in Sarah Bennett's sunlit office, Clara laid the documents on the desk pages of contracts, spreadsheets, and photographs, each a fragment of truth pulled from Julian's carefully guarded world. They weren't noisy accusations, but precise, deliberate strikes, honed to pierce the armor of his empire. Sarah turned each page slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Clara," she said, her voice like tempered steel, "this is bigger than your marriage. This is evidence of large-scale financial fraud." The records revealed everything. Julian and his mother, Victoria Warwick, had used their much-publicized charitable foundation to launder money through shell companies, masking illicit transfers beneath the gloss of philanthropy. Clara's files made it undeniable: spreadsheets, mapping the routes of funds, photographs of bank statements, and documents linking Victoria directly to the scheme. Clara thought back to the nights she had slipped into Julian's office, her hands shaking as she photographed files, knowing discovery could ruin her. She hadn't done it for vengeance. She'd done it for herself and her child, to keep the promise that their lives would not be built on lies. When Sarah finished reviewing the evidence, she looked up. "If you want this exposed, we start now." Clara's voice was soft but unwavering. "Do it." Sarah moved quickly, filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Clara expected months of bureaucracy, but the response was swift. Days later, as she sipped chamomile tea in Lila's kitchen, her phone buzzed with an alert. Warwick Properties under federal investigation for financial fraud. The news ticker bled red with the plunging stock price. Reporters called her the silent whistleblower, but Clara wanted no titles, only the relief that came with truth laid bare. Then came an unexpected call. Vanessa Reed, the woman from the balcony, had reached out to Sarah. Her voice shook as she admitted she too had been used by Julian. In exchange for immunity, she offered testimony, naming offshore accounts and producing proof of Victoria's signatures on illicit transfers. Clara felt a spark of empathy. She's a pawn too, she thought, and in that recognition, forgiveness loosened something long clenched inside her. Soon after, Victoria announced her resignation as chairwoman, her image on television stripped of its former command. Julian vanished to Lake Tahoe, hiding from the glare of a world that now saw him clearly. Watching the coverage, Clara rested her hand over the swell of her belly. The baby moved, a gentle reminder of why she had endured and fought. "We did it, my love," she whispered. It wasn't victory she felt, but peace, the steady strength of a woman who had faced the truth, let it speak, and was ready for whatever storm might follow. Clara Monroe stood by the window of her modest Santa Monica apartment, the early sunlight spilling in, tracing warm golden paths across the pale wooden floor. The space was simple, white walls, minimal furnishings, but it felt worlds away from the Beverly Hills mansion where she had once lived behind a gilded, suffocating mask. At 7 months pregnant, her body carried new weight, Yet her spirit felt lighter than it had in years, like a bird stretching its wings after a long winter. Her hand rested gently on her belly, feeling the subtle flutter of her child. Each movement whispered promises of a future filled with hope, not just for the little one she carried, but for herself. Gazing out at the sunlit shimmer of the Pacific Ocean, Clara smiled. I'm alive, she thought. Truly alive. This small apartment was her refuge, a place where the air was free of judgment and she could breathe without the shadow of fear. Reaching this point had taken courage. The aftermath of the Warwick scandal, the night's wrestling with Julian's betrayal, and the dismantling of the image of the perfect wife had been grueling. But she had learned to release not only her marriage, but also the silent version of herself she had been forced to inhabit. Strength now came in small, grounding moments: the sound of waves outside, the smell of Lila's morning coffee, her parents' steady presence. She wasn't running anymore. She was building. Clara found work at Harper & Sons, a small family-run construction company in Los Angeles. Its owner, Margaret Harper, with her salt and pepper hair and warm, knowing smile, welcomed her as though she were family. You have a special light, Clara, Margaret had said, words that soothed wounds left long unhealed. The work scheduling, filing, keeping projects organized wasn't glamorous, but it gave Clara purpose. Each evening she walked home with quiet pride, knowing her life now belonged entirely to her. She also gave her time to a women's support center, a place where voices of loss, survival, and resilience intertwined. The first time she stood before the group to tell her story, her hands trembled. She spoke of the slap on the balcony, of photographing Julian's hidden files, of stepping forward as a whistleblower. By the end, she saw empathy and admiration in their eyes and realized her story was more than pain. It was a light guiding others through their own darkness. Her parents had moved close by, their presence a constant source of comfort. Daniel brought warm dinners that tasted of home. Eleanor listened without judgment, her words of encouragement wrapping around Clara like a familiar melody. Lila remained her anchor, arriving with coffee and unvarnished truths. And Vanessa Reed, once a figure of betrayal, became an unexpected partner in reshaping the Warwick Foundation. Forgiving Vanessa wasn't for her, it was for Clara, a way to free herself from the weight of resentment. Each morning, Clara woke to the Santa Monica sun, feeling her baby's strength grow. In the mirror, she no longer saw a polished mask, but a woman marked by invisible scars and unshakable resolve. She didn't crave Julian's downfall. What she wanted was this: to be wholly herself. Notebook in hand, she stepped into the day, ready to live the life she had rebuilt, quiet, steady, and hers alone. Clara Monroe stood in her modest Santa Monica apartment, the early sun streaming through the window and painting golden trails across the pale wooden floor. The room, with its white walls and a handful of simple furnishings, was a far cry from the opulent Beverly Hills mansion where she had once lived, wrapped in a facade that glittered but suffocated. 7 months pregnant, she felt her body grow heavier by the day, yet her heart, for the first time in months, felt light like a bird, cautiously spreading its wings after a long confinement. Resting her hand on her belly, she felt the gentle stirrings of her child, each movement a whisper of promise. A new life was on the horizon, not just for the baby she carried, but for herself. She gazed toward the sparkling Pacific and smiled. I'm alive, she thought. Truly alive. The apartment, though humble, was her sanctuary, a place free from judgment, where she could breathe without fear. Getting here had been anything but easy. In the wake of the Warwick scandal, after countless sleepless nights wrestling with Julian's betrayal, she had learned to let go not only of her marriage, but of the image of the perfect, silent wife she had once tried to be. She found new strength in life's simplest pleasures: the crash of waves outside her window, the scent of Lila's morning coffee, her parents' steady, grounding embraces. She wasn't running anymore. She was building step by steady step. Clara took a job at Harper & Sons, a small, family-owned construction company in Los Angeles, where integrity replaced the deceit she had once known. Its owner, Margaret Harper, with salt and pepper hair and a warm, sincere smile, welcomed her like kin. You have a special light, Clara, Margaret had told her, words that soothed wounds long hidden. The work organizing schedules and managing files wasn't glamorous, but it filled her with purpose. Each evening she returned home with quiet pride, knowing she was shaping a life on her own terms. She also found meaning in service, joining the board of a women's support center where stories of hardship and resilience intertwined. The first time she spoke before the group, her hands shook as she recounted her journey from the slap on the balcony to photographing Julian's hidden documents to stepping forward as a whistleblower. By the end, the empathy and admiration in the women's eyes showed her that her story was more than pain, it was a light for others. I'm not alone, she thought, her heart warmed by a shared strength. Her parents moved nearby to support her, Daniel bringing comforting home-cooked meals, Eleanor offering a listening ear and steady encouragement. Lila, ever loyal, kept her grounded with coffee and blunt humor. Even Vanessa Reed, once part of her pain, became a partner in reshaping the Warwick Foundation. Clara forgave not for Vanessa, but for herself, to keep her flame from dimming under the weight of bitterness. Each morning Clara faced the sunlit ocean, her child growing stronger inside her. In the mirror, she no longer saw a polished mask, but a woman marked by scars and fortified by resolve. She didn't crave Julian's ruin, only her own freedom. Notebook in hand, she stepped into the day, ready to live the life she had built, one heartbeat at a time. A resounding slap shattered every sound in the room, slicing through the air like a whip. Every gaze instantly turned toward the pregnant woman at the center of it all. Clara Morgan, 32 years old, 8 months along, stood frozen like a statue beneath the glow of the crystal chandelier. Across the room, her husband Grant Morgan, an arrogant real estate tycoon, turned his back, his eyes fixed instead on the red-haired film actress who was smiling at her with open mockery. No one knew that this slap would mark the beginning of a chain of revelations that would bring Grant's entire world crashing down. And it all began with a single glance, 2 years earlier. One autumn afternoon in San Francisco, the city was drenched in golden honey-like sunlight, while a delicate veil of mist drifted in from the bay, winding its way through the sloping streets. Clara Morgan, just past 30 at the time, was bent over her desk in a spacious photography studio. She was an interior architect, a woman who believed that light was not just for seeing but for feeling. In that room, she adjusted each lamp by the millimeter, as though fine-tuning a piece of music toward its perfect note. The door opened softly, like a whispered secret. Grant Morgan stepped in wearing a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, his black hair slicked back with the meticulous care of a man who always knew he would be noticed. Yet what struck Clara was that he didn't glance at the oversized blueprints or the architectural models that most clients found irresistible. Instead, his gaze settled on her. It wasn't a probing or possessive look, but slow and deliberate, as if he were reading a story written in her posture, her eyes, and the stray strands of hair falling gently across her cheek. Clara hesitated for a moment, partly from surprise, partly from the strange sensation that someone had just opened a door to a place she'd never been. Their second meeting took place in a small cafe near Union Square. It was drizzling that day, and Grant appeared with a flawless black umbrella, holding a steaming cup of espresso. He spoke sparingly, each word measured, with a way of making the person across from him forget the rest of the world. Clara, usually adept at keeping a professional distance from her clients, found herself laughing more than she intended. The third time, well, that was different. It was an evening near the completion of the design project. Grant walked slowly toward her, watching her hands glide across the walnut surface she had chosen for the main hall. He stopped close enough that only a breath separated them, then spoke in a warm, resonant tone. I want you to be the last person to touch every corner of my house, and my heart. Clara laughed, not the shy kind, but the sort that escapes when you hear something absurd yet oddly charming. She tilted her head slightly, giving him a look that said, I'm not convinced yet. Though inside, a new current had begun to flow. 2 years later, in Napa Valley, they held a wedding so small, it wouldn't have made it into any magazine, which was exactly what they wanted. Instead of fireworks or overflowing champagne, the night offered only the glow of warm golden lights, the gentle notes of a piano, and the faint scent of ripe grapes drifting from the surrounding vineyards. Clara wore a simple ivory satin dress, free of heavy sequins or elaborate veils, yet when she entered, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. After the wedding, They moved into a Beverly Hills hillside mansion, something straight off the cover of Architectural Digest. Every stone tile, every linen curtain was chosen with Clara's careful hands, as though she were stitching each seam of their new life together. The house blended modern lines with a touch of nostalgia, its pristine white walls opening onto wide windows that welcomed the California Sunday. Clara believed, truly believed, that this love was the result of an unseen hand guiding their paths. They weren't just husband and wife. They were two puzzle pieces that fit so perfectly it seemed that without meeting they would have remained forever incomplete. Grant was busy closing high-stakes real estate deals, while Clara built her reputation in the design world. They became the couple every Los Angeles soiree wanted to host, not only for their polished exterior, but for the sense they gave that theirs was a genuine love story in a world filled with counterfeit ones. But even the most solid walls can crack. Clara didn't notice the subtle signs, text messages answered later than usual, business trips stretching longer than planned, or the way Grant's eyes sometimes drifted when she spoke excitedly about a new project. They were only small ripples on the surface of the lake, not yet enough to warn of an approaching storm. The only thing she knew at that moment was that she was living a dream, one born from that first look in the San Francisco studio and nurtured by what felt like endless days of happiness. Yet somewhere beyond this flawless picture, a thin, fragile thread had begun to loosen from the fabric. The good news came on a crisp October morning, just as the California sunlight slipped through the linen curtains Clara had chosen during her trip to Italy the year before. She stood in the bathroom, hands trembling slightly as two vivid red lines appeared. In that instant, every sound from the street outside seemed to vanish. She couldn't wait. She stepped quickly into the living room and placed the pregnancy test into Grant's hand. Her eyes were alight, as if one firm embrace could make everything complete. Grant smiled, but it was the kind of smile as fragile as morning mist beautiful, yet ready to dissolve at the slightest touch. He held her, but the embrace was not tight enough for warmth to seep deep into her heart. Clara told herself he was simply surprised. After all, a busy millionaire might need time to get used to the idea of becoming a father. But as time passed, that getting used to it slowly turned into distance. Grant began coming home later, offering excuses of endless meetings or urgent business trips to New York. Their dinners, once moments to share the little details of their days, became quiet affairs. The only sounds the faint clink of cutlery against porcelain, the silence filled by the cold blue glow of his laptop screen. Clara realized she was living with someone while existing in two parallel worlds. She was in the kitchen, wrapped in the scent of morning toast. He was in the cold space of numbers and contracts. Sometimes, they only crossed paths in the doorway, exchanging a perfunctory kiss like a social formality. She tried to spark conversation, sharing stories about new design projects or an art exhibit downtown, but Grant's gaze often drifted, as though he were busy calculating a multi-million-dollar real estate deal in his head. Clara began spending more time in her studio, burying herself in sketches and color palettes, as if those lines and shades were the only way to keep her mind from dwelling on the growing emptiness between them. Then one afternoon, while sipping tea and scrolling through her phone, Clara stumbled upon a photo spreading across social media. Grant, hand in hand with Ruby Hale, a rising Hollywood actress with fiery red hair and a smile bright enough to make every paparazzo's flash fire at once. The setting was a movie premiere in Los Angeles. They weren't kissing, but the way Grant looked at Ruby, it was the same look that had once made Clara believe eternal love was real. She zoomed in, studying the image closely, hoping to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a poorly timed shot. Maybe he was simply being polite to a business contact in the entertainment industry. But her heart, always quicker than reason, whispered that what she was seeing was no accident. Instead of anger, Clara felt a deep weariness seep into every breath. She thought back to the nights Grant came home late, the curt text replies, the hugs that no longer felt whole. They weren't signs of busyness, they were signs of someone who had stepped out of the story they once wrote together. She didn't confront him immediately. Clara knew emotions were like glass once shattered. They could never be pieced back together perfectly. She needed time to decide whether to pick up the hammer. In the meantime, Grant went on with his life, moving between gleaming glass towers and glittering night parties. Clara began to watch more closely, noting the small details, A new scent of cologne on his shirt, a tie she had never seen before, or the way he smiled at his phone as though reading a message that pleased him. There was no hard evidence, but a woman doesn't need proof to feel the truth. Deep down, Clara knew they were drifting apart not because of a violent storm, but because of a silent current pulling them in different directions. And when the image of Grant and Ruby appeared on her phone screen, that current became clearer than ever. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. The Plaza Hotel in New York, that night glowed like a lone star against the winter sky. The grand lobby was bathed in the warm gold of massive crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across sparkling champagne glasses and the rich, rolling laughter of the city's elite. The air was both sweet and false, like a jazz tune played for too long, its highest notes already worn and tired. Clara arrived alone, stepping through the weighty revolving doors in a pearl-colored satin dress that embraced the curve of her 8-month pregnancy. It wasn't the kind of dress meant to flaunt. It was a quiet reminder to herself that she still existed whole in a world eager to reduce her to a shadow. She had chosen low heels not to avoid judgmental stares, but because tonight more than ever she needed her footing steady. She hadn't come to be the center of the evening. She had come to end something that had been silently draining her for months. The main ballroom hummed like a well-rehearsed play, one performed hundreds of times. Everyone knew their role. Businesswomen glittering like gemstones, investors whose wide smiles hid careful calculations. And in the center of it all, Grant Morgan stood as if the lights existed solely to illuminate him. His tuxedo perfectly tailored, his smile disarmingly charming, his gestures precise, every detail about him calculated to perfection. Beside him, Ruby Hale was a streak of red silk against a sea of black and gold. Her hair, the color of embers, fell softly over her shoulders. Her lips curved into a smile measured just enough to signal intimacy, yet restrained enough to maintain the poise of a social acquaintance. And yet, Ruby's hand rested lightly against Grant's, and his did not pull away. Clara lingered at the doorway for a few seconds, watching the scene as though it were an old film in which she had once starred but in which she'd now been replaced. Her heart didn't race, nor did jealousy flare. There was only silence, the silence of someone who had stopped hoping. She began to walk forward. Each step across the marble floor rang out in steady rhythm, like the beat of a drum calling an approaching climax. A few guests recognized her. Their eyes flickered quickly, weighing whether to greet her or to pretend they hadn't noticed. Clara didn't care. When only a few paces remained, Grant turned. For a flicker of a moment, surprise touched his eyes, but his expression held firm. Ruby tilted her head, her half-smile deepening, curiosity brightening her gaze. Clara stopped, ready to speak, not to accuse, but simply to hear an explanation, whether it was truth or a lie. But before she could speak, Grant's hand came down hard against her cheek. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and unmistakable, in a room now sinking into silence. The music stopped, as if someone had cut the strings. A spoon poised above a champagne flute never made its chime. Some eyes widened, others darted away, as if the moment had never happened. Clara stood motionless, her own hand rising to the heat blooming on her cheek. The pain wasn't in her skin, it came from the deepest part of her, the place where every last fragment of trust had once lived. She didn't cry. She didn't step back. Her gaze locked on Grant, void of the warmth it had once held. What remained was an unsettling calm, the kind that comes when someone has just witnessed a chapter of their life closing. In that moment she understood her love had died long ago, and this slap was nothing more than its public epitaph. Ruby slipped her hand from Grant's habit, taking a small step back. Whether it was shame or the dawning realization that she'd just become part of a scene the whole city would whisper about, Clara didn't know. But it no longer mattered to her. She turned, walking through the mix of pitying and curious stares. The satin hem of her dress skimmed the floor, her low heels striking a steady, muted beat. No one stopped her. No one dared call her name. New York's night air was colder than usual. As Clara stepped out of the Plaza Hotel, the wind swept through her hair, carrying away the scent of expensive perfume from the ballroom and replacing it with the grit of the street and the hum of traffic. She gripped her clutch tightly, as though holding on to the last tangible piece of her dignity. Clara didn't return to the Beverly Hills mansion, where the golden glow of the chandeliers had grown unfamiliar. Instead, she took a red-eye flight back to New York, then a cab to Brooklyn, to the old apartment she'd left behind years ago. It was on the third floor of a red brick building, its windows looking out over a quiet street where cafes stayed open late, even in winter. Inside, it was exactly as she'd left it. Linen cushions stacked unevenly on the sofa, the faint scent of old wood drifting in the air, and an oak cabinet with a small scratch on its handle, one she had once meant to replace but kept instead because it had character. Clara set her bag down, leaving the overhead light off, letting only the soft amber glow from a table lamp spill across the room, wrapping it in a warmth she hadn't felt in so long. She walked to the bed, knelt down, and reached underneath. Her fingers touched something familiar, a small, weathered tin box, its edges dented by time. Inside were envelopes yellowed with age, the handwriting delicate, slightly slanted, every one from Noah Parker. Noah. His name still stirred in her a mix of warmth and an ache deep in her chest. He had been a war correspondent, the man who once made her believe there were eyes deep enough to see straight through her armor. They had met when she was just starting her design career, at a photography exhibit in Lower Manhattan. Noah spoke to her as if the entire room had vanished, and when he smiled, it spilled out like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. They loved each other, but their love always lived under the shadow of faraway lands riddled with gunfire. Noah left, returned, and left again, until the day a short statement from an international organization confirmed he had been killed in an explosion in Syria. That news split Clara in two. 3 years later, when she thought the wound had long scarred over, she joined a humanitarian trip to the Arizona desert, and there he was. No warning, no explanation, just Noah, standing there, thinner, more sunburned, but with the same eyes. They had only 3 days. 3 days to fill the empty spaces of the years apart, yet not enough to say everything. No promises, no plans for the future. Only the final night in the desert, an endless sky scattered with stars, and the two of them lying side by side in the silence of those who had both lost and found the only thing that remained. Love. Then he was gone again, like a hot wind sweeping across the sand. A week later, news came that he had truly died, this time in a car bombing near the border. No funeral, no farewell, just a small news article and confirmation from the authorities. Clara cried, but only when she was alone. And then, a few weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. It wasn't a mistake, it was a miracle. She called it the last gift he had left her. She never told Grant, not out of fear, but because she wanted to keep this as a sacred place untouched by the outside world. The baby was the last thread connecting her to Noah, to a love once devoured by war. Sitting in the Brooklyn apartment, Clara opened each letter, reading words blurred by the years. Each line was a fragment of them, a story he told about a small village on the Mediterranean coast, a photograph printed on silver paper of children grinning ear to ear, a hurried note of only 3 words. I miss you. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the faint movement inside. Outside, winter bit at the city. Inside her, a small flame still burned. Morning in Brooklyn began with a smell of coffee and the distant honk of traffic rising from the street below, but today, Clara felt no sense of peace. She had just finished steeping a cup of mint tea when a knock came at the door, not hurried, but firm enough to signal that whoever stood outside carried something important. Daniel Rhodes, the investigative journalist whose exposés had shaken the upper echelons of the financial world, stood in the doorway. A long gray coat draped his frame, his face etched with the lines of sleepless nights, and his eyes bright, cold, looked as though they always saw more than people intended to reveal. Without preamble, he placed a tablet on the kitchen counter. The images that appeared were crisp, undeniable. Complex financial records, the names of shell companies, and a string of transactions laundered through accounts in the Cayman Islands. Among them were forged signatures in Clara's name, used to legitimize massive wire transfers. If Grant were caught, this wouldn't just be a financial scandal, it would be a complete and devastating collapse. But Daniel wasn't finished. Another photo surfaced on the screen, slightly blurred from low light, yet clear enough to recognize Grant escorting Ruby Hale into a private OB-GYN clinic on the Upper West Side. Her belly wasn't showing yet, but the hand she rested there said everything. Clara looked at the images with an unfamiliar calm. Not jealousy, not even anger. What she felt was a sharp, cold clarity, as though the final pieces of a puzzle had clicked into place. And that puzzle, no matter how beautiful it had once seemed, was nothing more than a forgery. The day of the trial arrived under a heavy gray Manhattan sky, low clouds pressing against the steel spires of the skyline. The courtroom was large, but without grandeur, white light, wooden benches, and a chill that seemed to sharpen every sound. Clara sat in the front row, one hand resting lightly on her belly, every movement of the child inside a reminder that this day was not just for her. Denise Harper, Clara's attorney, a silver-haired woman whose gaze cut like a blade opened by presenting the chain of evidence Daniel had uncovered. Photo after photo, statement after statement, flashed on the screen, each one a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. Grant sat at the defense table, his face fixed in an attempt at composure, but his clenched hands betrayed him. Then Denise moved to the DNA results. A three-dimensional rendering of the analysis filled the display, cold, clinical, unyielding to sentiment. The child in Clara's womb did not carry Grant Morgan's bloodline. A hush swept over the room. The judge's gavel struck the bench with a sound that seemed to echo in the silence. But the sharpest blow was yet to come. Denise presented a folder stamped in red from the International Humanitarian Organization. Inside was confirmation that Noah Parker, the man the world believed dead, had in fact been rescued from a war zone in the Middle East, had recovered, and was now living in seclusion in a small coastal town in Maine. Whispers erupted in the gallery, but Denise pressed on. She revealed the will of the Parker Family Trust, valued at $400 million and established over a century ago. The sole condition, the legal heir must be a direct descendant of the Parker bloodline, and the child Clara was carrying Noah's child was the only living heir. The silence returned, this time heavier, denser. Grant lowered his head, eyes fixed on the table. The confident gaze, the familiar smile, both were gone. Perhaps, for the first time, he realized that all the power he thought he held was nothing but an illusion when confronted with unvarnished truth. Clara didn't smile, didn't allow triumph to creep into her expression. She sat upright, her gaze steady. This was not a victory to save her, it was a release, a severing of the chains that had bound her for far too long. Outside, rain began to fall, each drop a measured beat, like the breathing of a city bearing witness to the first page of a new chapter. That morning in Brooklyn was no different from 100 mornings before it. Yet for Clara, every ray of sunlight slipping through the gap in the curtains carried a special meaning. She carried August out to the small balcony, where rows of cactus and mint plants stood shoulder to shoulder. From here, she could look down at the cobblestone street, see the cafes opening early to welcome their first customers, and hear the distant chime of a bicycle bell. The sun was rising, spilling honey gold light over the weathered rooftops. August burrowed his head into his mother's shoulder, his tiny hands instinctively clutching the collar of her shirt. Clara drew in a slow breath, feeling the steady rhythm of her son's breathing, a small but unwavering heartbeat, a reminder that every storm eventually passes. Today marked exactly 1 year since the slap at the Plaza Hotel. No one but her remembered. She hadn't marked it on a calendar, nor had she turned it into a visible scar. For Clara, this day was no longer the anniversary of humiliation. It was the milestone of her rebirth. A year ago, she had walked away from the glow of crystal chandeliers into an unknown darkness. Now, the light of morning belonged entirely to her. Looking back, Clara realized her story had never been solely about betrayal. Yes, Grant had betrayed her. Yes, his deceit had pushed her to the very bottom. But if it had ended there, she would have remained a victim. Her journey was one of reclaiming herself from a woman who once stood beside power to one who had the courage to stand alone and rebuild from nothing. The August Project had since grown into a community, Women who had once entered the studio with empty eyes now knew how to laugh again. They brought with them different stories, abandonment, betrayal, or simply having lost themselves. But when they left, each carried something new, an unfinished painting, a potted plant they had nurtured, or simply the belief that they still had the right to choose their own path. Noah remained by her side, not loudly, not overbearing. He understood that Clara did not need a savior. What she needed was a companion, and he was willing to be that. Between them there was no longer the urgency of youth, but a rare kind of patience, as if both knew that the most valuable things take time to grow. Sometimes Clara thought of Grant, but never with anger. He had chosen his path, and that path had led him out of her life. That was enough. Life was never fair, but justice sometimes arrived in the quietest way, by letting those who once thought themselves invincible live with the consequences of their own actions. The first pages of Clara's life story had been soaked in tears and loss, but the next chapters were being written in resilience and kindness, because she understood one simple truth: pain does not define a person. How they rise after it, that is what endures. August stirred slightly, his eyes still closed. Clara smiled, pulling a thin blanket around them both. Somewhere below, someone called out a coffee order, and laughter drifted up from a group of students at the cafe across the street. The city was still noisy, but here, on this balcony, time felt suspended. She whispered softly, as if speaking to herself, this was not the ending. This was simply a chapter closing, making way for the next one. And this time, Clara was the sole author. In the romantic atmosphere of your sister's wedding at the Plaza Hotel in New York, you, Elena Thompson, force a strained smile as you catch the bridal bouquet, clinging to the hope it might bring luck to your fractured marriage. But then, amidst the applause, your husband Victor, the powerful CEO of a tech company in Silicon Alley, erupts in anger and slaps you hard across the face, right in front of hundreds of guests. You're pregnant, aching in both body and soul. But Father Lucas, the priest your brother, once a lawyer, pulls him away, whispering, he's hiding something horrific. From that slap, Elena uncovers an affair with a young assistant and a massive money laundering scheme. Don't miss her journey from hell to freedom. You might see yourself in her story. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, where granite columns gleam under the summer sun, Elena's younger sister, Sophia, glides down the aisle like a modern goddess. Her vintage lace wedding dress clings perfectly to her frame, accentuating the gentle curve of her 5-month pregnant belly, a radiant symbol of pure joy and new hope. Sophia's new husband, a kind-hearted software engineer from Queens, gazes at her as if she's the world's greatest invention, not a tech app, but true love itself. Their vows echo through the cathedral, carrying the scent of white roses and blessings from Father Lucas, the officiating priest, who happens to be Elena's brother, a renowned Manhattan lawyer, before embracing a path of faith, now standing there with a warm smile but eyes betraying a subtle worry. Elena Thompson, 42, stands as a bridesmaid, adjusting her silk dress for the third time in 10 fleeting minutes. The smooth silk suddenly feels too tight, as if struggling to contain the anxieties swelling inside her. At this age, 5 months pregnant, a late, unexpected gift after 2 decades of marriage. This should be a time of joy, but today, it only weighs her down. Watching Sophia glow, Elena feels a quiet pang of envy. Her 2 8-year-old sister radiates an authentic happiness that seems to touch everyone around, from Armani-clad guests to aunts from Brooklyn. And Elena? She's accustomed to society weddings, where everything is a facade. Upper East Side galas, where business networking hides behind expensive wine and fake smiles. This wedding feels different, so genuine it tightens her chest, as if whispering what real happiness looks like, and it bears no resemblance to her own life. Beside Elena stands Victor Hayes, her husband of 20 years, the 5-year-old CEO of Hayes Tech, a billion-dollar tech empire in Manhattan's Silicon Alley. At 6'2", his tailored Italian suit hugs his broad shoulders and trim waist, commanding attention wherever he goes. His cologne, pricier than most people's monthly rent in Queens, wafts with the scent of success and power. But his arm around Elena's waist today feels possessive rather than affectionate, as if he's marking territory instead of sharing joy. Elena is used to this. Their marriage has become a polished business arrangement, filled with charity galas at the plaza, vacations in the Hamptons, and private jet trips to San Francisco for board meetings. Victor scans the crowd, his calculating eyes those of a businessman hunting opportunities, even at his sister-in-law's wedding. He's likely plotting how to pitch an investor among the wealthy guests. With a bitter hint of humor, Elena wonders if he'll seal a deal at the dessert table or at least swap business cards between bites of wedding cake. She nods at polite remarks from relatives who admire her perfect life, the Upper East Side penthouse, the charity galas she hosts, and now the news of a baby on the way. But behind her practiced smile, Elena feels the growing distance. Victor whispers in her ear, "You look stunning today, but don't let that baby bump slow you down." The words sound like a compliment but carry a subtle jab, a little joke he often uses to keep her in her place as the perfect wife. Always beautiful but never an embarrassment. Elena laughs it off, but inside, she wonders when his words became so sharp. As Sophia turns and tosses the bouquet, the single women jostle and laugh, and though Elena doesn't try, the bouquet of white roses lands in her hands, its silk ribbon wrapping around her fingers like fate. Victor murmurs, "Maybe it's a sign for a renewal in our marriage." His smile doesn't reach his eyes, and a chill runs down Elena's spine as if he's hinting at something only he understands. In that moment, amid applause and laughter, Elena can't help but smile at the ironic thought that this bouquet might be a curse rather than a blessing like in those American rom-coms she's watched, where catching the bouquet flips the heroine's life upside down. But in reality, she has no idea that in just a few hours, a slap will change everything, tearing apart the facade she's fought to maintain for 2 decades. The scene shifts from the sacred grandeur of St. Patrick's Cathedral to the lavish opulence of the Plaza Hotel, where Sophia's wedding reception unfolds like a quintessential American dream, extravagant, glittering, and simmering with secrets beneath the surface. Crystal chandeliers cast a glow over tables draped in cream linen, adorned with pristine white roses, offering a mesmerizing view of Central Park, where couples stroll beneath lush green trees. This is the kind of event every New Yorker dreams of. French champagne flowing like a river, delicate lobster appetizers, and laughter echoing from wealthy Upper East Side guests. Elena, still reeling from catching the bouquet, tries to mingle with relatives and friends, answering familiar questions about her affluent life, the luxurious Upper East Side penthouse, weekend getaways in the Hamptons, and now the joyful news of her unborn child. But amidst the lively crowd, a strange loneliness creeps in, as if her 5-month pregnant belly is reminding her of the voids in her heart, voids that Victor seems incapable of filling. Victor, the quintessential Manhattan CEO, tall, confident, exuding the scent of success, moves through the room like a shark in a social ocean. He engages guests not about the wedding's joy, but about potential business opportunities, scanning the crowd to spot investors or partners for Hayes Tech. Elena watches him from afar, feeling the growing distance. He laughs heartily, claps shoulders warmly, but when he returns to her side, his smile vanishes, replaced by a calculating gaze. She tries to fill the silence with light comments about the floral arrangements or Sophia's impeccable taste, but Victor only nods absently, his mind clearly elsewhere, perhaps on boardroom meetings in Silicon Alley. Or worse, on the late-night dinners he's been having with Madison, his 2 5-year-old assistant with an ambitious smile and legs that seem to go on forever. The tension escalates when Elena, unable to hold back, quietly asks about those late work sessions. She only wants a simple reassurance, a tender gesture between husband and wife, but Victor snaps, his face flushing red under the chandelier light. "Are you questioning me?" He hisses, his voice low enough to avoid eavesdroppers, but sharp enough to pierce Elena's heart. And then, before everyone, the laughing guests, the toasting relatives, Victor raises his hand and slaps her hard across the face, the sound reverberating like a bomb in the festive air. Elena's cheek burns, tears welling up, but she holds herself together, too stunned to speak. The crowd falls silent, smiles frozen, and someone whispers, "Oh my God," while another guest awkwardly jokes, maybe he mistook her for a tough investor. A clumsy attempt at humor to diffuse the heavy atmosphere, but no one laughs. Victor growls, "You're embarrassing me," before turning away, leaving Elena standing there, hand on her cheek, humiliation spreading like wildfire. Father Lucas, Elena's brother the priest with a past as a top-tier lawyer before choosing a religious path, rushes to her side, his face stern beneath his ceremonial robes. He pulls Victor into the hallway, his voice a commanding whisper, like a lawyer cross-examining a witness. After the reception, as the crowd thins and the plaza grows quieter, Lucas takes Elena to a private corner and reveals a horrifying truth he's kept hidden. A private investigator named Rebecca contacted him weeks ago, suspecting Victor of large-scale financial fraud, money laundering through Hayes Tech, tax evasion worth millions, and secret transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Worse, Rebecca has evidence of an affair with Madison, that young assistant, with clandestine meetings at hotels and upscale restaurants in Midtown. Elena is floored, her heart pounding like a war drum, the pieces falling into place. The late-night calls Victor took behind closed study doors, his sudden interest in Swiss banks, and the way he started buying new clothes and hitting the gym obsessively, all now glaring warning signs she'd willfully ignored. Pregnant at this age, what should have been a joy now makes her feel more vulnerable than ever, as if her unborn child is witnessing the collapse of their family. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. The morning after, as the first rays of sunlight filter through the lush green canopy of Central Park, Elena seeks refuge at her favorite cafe on Central Park. West, a cozy nook filled with the rich aroma of espresso and the murmurs of busy New Yorkers, a place where she often escapes the frenetic pace of the Upper East Side. After a sleepless night, her cheeks still stinging from Victor's slap and her mind reeling from her brother Lucas's horrifying revelations, Elena craves a familiar haven to sort her thoughts, as if a latte with oat milk could quell the storm raging in her heart. This cafe, with its worn wooden chairs and exposed brick walls adorned with local artists' paintings, always feels authentic, a wry contrast to the polished extravagance Victor has built, where everything gleams to perfection, like the flawless tech apps of Hayes Tech he endlessly boasts about. Elena chooses her usual corner table by the window, where she can watch dog walkers in the park, young couples embracing under the trees, and tries to lose herself in the novel Sophia gave her, a story of women rediscovering themselves in midlife, now feeling like prophecy. But fate, with its dark sense of humor, has other plans. Just a few feet away, behind a high-backed chair, sit Victor and Madison, huddled close, as if this cafe is their secret office. Elena freezes, her heart pounding, but she doesn't turn. Instead, she pretends to focus on her phone, ears straining to catch every whispered word. Victor, with the confident tone of a Manhattan CEO, lays out his plans as if pitching to a boardroom rather than confiding in his mistress. He admits, with a casual arrogance laced with excitement, that he's funneled millions of dollars into accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, vast sums from Hayes Tech's investment funds, masked as legitimate transactions. "We'll disappear right after this wedding," he says, voice low, but clear enough for Elena to hear, leaving Elena with nothing. She deserves it for being so naive. Only good for shopping and useless charity. Madison giggles, and Elena feels a stab of pain. Victor paints her as an irresponsible wife, a nuisance in his empire, living off his generosity without questioning where the money comes from. He smirks as he mocks how she's too busy with plaza galas to notice reality, as if Elena's life is a comedy he's directed, where she plays the clueless sidekick to his shining star. Elena trembles, gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turn white, but she doesn't confront them. Fear mingled with fury keeps her rooted, listening on. Victor continues, revealing plans to flee with Madison post-wedding, leaving Elena with an unborn child and assets seized, calling it a lesson in dependency. He laughs, comparing her to the foolish investors who lost money in Hayes Tech's ventures. A dark humor Elena once found charming, now venomous mockery. Madison asks, "What about your wife?" And Victor replies with a dismissive tone, like discussing an employee about to be fired. "She'll figure out how to survive. But that's no longer my problem." Elena feels a bitter taste spread from her mouth to her heart, realizing Victor isn't just cheating but a sociopathic criminal, treating others as tools for his ambition. A monster cloaked in the polished veneer of a CEO revered by Manhattan. She leaves the cafe undetected, legs shaking as if after an earthquake, and immediately calls Lucas. With his background as a Wall Street lawyer who handled major financial cases before becoming a priest, Lucas listens and urges her to work with private investigator Rebecca and the FBI. "This isn't just an affair, sister. This is federal crime, and we need to act before he vanishes." Elena, still reeling but feeling a spark of fierce determination ignite beneath her pain, realizes Victor isn't the husband she imagined, but a manipulator who sees her as disposable property. Her pregnancy makes her more vulnerable, but it also fuels her strength. This child deserves a mother who's a fighter, not a victim. Sitting in the park, a cool breeze from Central Park easing her dizziness, Elena wonders with bitter humor if yesterday's bouquet was a warning rather than a stroke of luck. From the tranquil corner of a cafe on Central Park West, where Victor's whispered betrayals still echo in her ears, Elena dives into a daring plan straight out of an American spy thriller, but this is real life, backed by the FBI and fueled by her own heart. After an urgent call to her brother Lucas, the priest with the razor-sharp analytical mind of a former Wall Street lawyer, Elena meets private investigator Rebecca in a discreet Midtown Manhattan office. Rebecca, with a professional demeanor and steely eyes that have unraveled countless corporate secrets, lays it out plainly. Victor isn't just an adulterer, he's the linchpin of a massive financial fraud network, and Elena is the key to bringing him down. With her 5-month pregnant belly reminding her of the responsibility ahead, Elena agrees to cooperate, wearing a wire cunningly hidden in a pearl necklace, a gift from Victor years ago, now an ironic weapon of retaliation, as if fate is smirking at its own twisted joke. Elena returns to their Upper East Side penthouse, where glass walls overlooking Manhattan's bustling streets once symbolized their shared success, but now serve as the stage for a final showdown. She arranges a meeting with Victor under the guise of wanting to support his escape, her voice trembling yet resolute over the phone, convincing enough to make him believe she's still the dependent, naive wife he always described. When Victor enters, his suit still carrying the scent of expensive cologne from a boardroom meeting, he embraces her mechanically, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for surveillance. Elena, heart pounding beneath the loose dress hiding her baby bump, begins the conversation with subtle probing, feigning admiration for his brilliance in handling the investigation. Victor, his CEO ego swollen like the skyscrapers of Silicon Alley, falls into the trap boasting confidently about funneling $37 million illegally through disguised transactions, from Hayes Tech's investment funds to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, all under the veneer of tax optimization he chuckles at, like an inside joke among Manhattan's elite. Under the pretense of wanting to get through this together, Elena deftly steers the conversation, coaxing Victor to confess more about his indifference to his victims, middle-class investors from Queens or Brooklyn who lost retirement savings, dismissed by him as fools who couldn't handle risk. His voice drips with arrogance, as if addressing shareholders rather than confessing to his wife, and Elena feels a surge of anger mixed with nausea. But she stays composed, her hand unconsciously cradling her belly as if shielding her unborn child from the toxicity unfolding. Victor goes on, revealing his plan to abandon Elena for Madison. "She gets my ambition, unlike you, who's only good for charity and shopping," his words cut like a sharp knife. yet carry a dark humor as Elena silently thinks those charity galas might be the only authentic thing in their fabricated life. He laughs loudly, likening his escape to a successful startup, as if financial crime is just another tech venture needing savvy investment. But the real climax hits when the FBI storms Madison's apartment in Brooklyn, a vibrant neighborhood of hipster bars and street graffiti where Madison thought she was safe with her lover. Elena, watching from afar via Rebecca's phone live stream, sees Victor handcuffed, his face pale as agents uncover $500,000 in cash stuffed in a suitcase and a fake passport under another name, ready for a flight to an island with no extradition treaty. He thrashes, shouting, "This is a misunderstanding!" But his eyes betray the fear of a CEO used to dominating, now powerless like a fired employee. Elena sits alone in the Upper East Side penthouse, hands trembling as she removes the wire, a flood of relief and pain washing over her relief that justice is near. Pain from realizing her 20-year marriage was a gilded cage, where she was trapped by financial dependency and sweet lies. The assets are seized immediately: the penthouse, the Hamptons retreat, the bank accounts, leaving her with a vague fear of the future, especially with a child soon to be born needing a stable home. But in that moment, Elena feels a newfound strength, as if yesterday's slap and today's confession have burned away the facade, revealing the real woman within. The morning Victor was handcuffed and led away from Madison's Brooklyn apartment, sunlight streamed through the windows of Elena's Upper East Side penthouse, as if heralding the dawn of a new chapter, though it came at the cost of a world once deemed perfect. With Victor facing a 15-year sentence for financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to flee prosecution, the FBI seized nearly everything: the lavish penthouse overlooking Manhattan's skyline, the Hamptons beach house with its white sand shores, and bank accounts once brimming with extravagant figures. Elena, now 42 and 5 months pregnant, is left with just $15,000 in a personal checking account and a handful of belongings, designer dresses now like costumes from a play that's ended. But instead of collapsing, Elena feels a breeze of freedom creeping in, as if for the first time in 2 decades, she's allowed to breathe air untainted by Victor's ambitions. She moves to a small apartment in Brooklyn Heights, where cobblestone streets and maple trees offer a warmth far removed from Manhattan's cold skyscrapers. The apartment, with large windows facing New York Harbor, isn't spacious but floods with natural light, as if mirroring an Elena rediscovering herself. With support from her brother Lucas the priest, with a former lawyer's keen mind, now her unofficial legal advisor Elena enrolls in a master's program in social work at New York University. She wants to turn her pain into purpose, much like New Yorkers transform hardship into street art in Williamsburg. Lucas, with his salt and pepper hair and pensive eyes, guides her through legal steps to protect her remaining assets, and their talks at St. Patrick's Cathedral become a balm for her soul, where she learns to forgive herself for living in a gilded cage. Elena begins volunteering at the Women's Financial Independence Center in Brooklyn, a small but passionate organization where women escaping financial abuse rebuild their lives. With her long unused bachelor's degree in social work, Elena quickly becomes a trusted ally for women like Maria, a single mother once living in her car, too scared to leave a controlling husband. She shares her story, not to boast, but to inspire, helping them learn to budget, open personal accounts, and reclaim confidence. Each counseling session is a step forward, not just for them but for Elena, who realizes strength comes not from wealth or status, but from rising after being knocked down, a quintessentially Brooklyn lesson, where resilience trumps glamour. 6 months later, thanks to her cooperation with the FBI, Elena receives $1 million from Victor's recovered assets, not enough to return to her former lavish life, but enough to secure financial stability for her and her unborn child. Instead of buying designer dresses or investing in a new Manhattan apartment, she chooses simplicity, purchasing a worn armchair from a Brooklyn flea market for reading and a local artist's painting for her living room. With a touch of self-deprecating humor, Elena thinks Victor would be shocked to see her choose a $50 chair over an Italian sofa, a small but profound act of rebellion. Her unborn child, now kicking strongly, becomes a new source of strength. Each kick reminds her she's living not just for herself, but for a future demanding courage and authenticity. But the past doesn't let go easily. On sleepless nights, Elena lies awake, hearing distant traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge, wondering if she's truly escaped Victor's shadow. Financial articles in the Wall Street Journal still mention the Hayes tech scandal, and she receives messages from reporters wanting to interview the betrayed wife. She declines, not ready to turn her pain into sensational headlines. Lucas, with a priest's wisdom and a lawyer's sharp insight, reminds her that the past only holds power if she allows it. Elena begins to understand that rebirth isn't about erasing the past, but building a future where she's the author of her own story, a story that doesn't need Manhattan's glitter to shine. 1 year after the fateful slap at Sophia's wedding, Elena stands in the sanctuary of St. Patrick's Cathedral, where shimmering light from stained glass windows paints rainbow patterns on the stone floor, as if fate itself is smiling at her journey of rebirth. Today, she's not the bridesmaid adjusting a silk dress or the dependent wife trembling in Victor's shadow, but a 3-year-old woman, mother to a 3-month-old boy, and a newly minted master's graduate in social work from New York University. The graduation ceremony unfolds in this very sanctuary, where a year ago Sophia's bouquet fell into her hands, not promising marital bliss as tradition suggests, but the courage to shatter her gilded cage and rewrite her own story. Elena, in a simple black dress instead of a costly gala gown, stands among her classmates, feeling pride surge not from Manhattan's high society approval, but from becoming the truest version of herself. The past year has been a whirlwind of loss and renewal. After Victor's 15-year sentence for financial fraud and money laundering, Elena lost the Upper East Side penthouse, the Hamptons beach house, and the Mrs. A's status that once made her a darling of charity galas. But in Brooklyn Heights, in a small apartment with exposed brick walls and the sound of waves from the harbor, she found a simple yet fulfilling life. She became a full-time counselor at the Women's Financial Independence Center, helping dozens of women like Lisa, who once lived in her car, too scared to leave a controlling husband, learn to open bank accounts, budget, and trust their inner strength. Each success story builds Elena's confidence, and her son, named Noah at Lucas's suggestion, becomes a flame warming her heart each night when his cries echo in their modest apartment. But the past still knocks. An unexpected request from Victor, sent through his lawyer, forces Elena to face him one last time at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Driving rural roads, gripping the wheel of her self-bought Honda Civic, she braces for a meeting she knows won't yield a sincere apology. In the prison's visiting room, under harsh fluorescent light, Victor is no longer the arrogant Silicon Alley CEO. His hair grayer, face gaunt, and prison uniform making him look small, like a minor character in the story he once directed. He tries to manipulate her again, using familiar sweet words, but Elena sees through it, no remorse, only regret for being caught. She refuses to forgive, not out of anger, but because she doesn't need his validation to move forward. The slap at the wedding, she now understands, wasn't an accident, but an opportunity to awaken, to realize true freedom comes not from wealth or status, but from living by her own values. Back in Brooklyn, Elena shares her story through a documentary by filmmaker Jennifer Walsh, aiming to inspire women across America with their inner strength. Filming sessions at the center, where she counsels women escaping financial abuse, become living proof that happiness lies not in penthouses or designer dresses, but in rising after being knocked down. Lucas, her brother, now not just a priest but an advocate for financial reform, testifying before Congress about protecting victims of white-collar crime, smiles as he watches Elena cradle Noah, joking that she's now the queen of Brooklyn Heights, no Manhattan crown needed. His smile carries gentle humor, but also acknowledges she's weathered a storm to find her own sunlight. Standing alone in the sanctuary after the graduation, Elena gazes at the spot where the bouquet once landed in her hands. She realizes it didn't promise marital happiness, but the courage to live authentically, a gift more valuable than any bank account Victor ever controlled. Now, she drives home with Noah, sleeping soundly in his car seat, through Brooklyn's vibrant, lamp-lit streets, knowing this real life is what she always craved. Elena smiles, thinking with a touch of humor that if Victor saw her now, he'd be stunned to know she's happier than ever without him. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. What if the man you trusted most shattered your world with a single, brutal slap right in public while you're carrying his child? Elena stands frozen on the Beverly Wilshire rooftop, the cool Pacific breeze carrying the scent of her husband's infidelity as he embraces his mistress, then turns his fury on her. "You're nothing without me," he snarls, the crack echoing like thunder, phones capturing every humiliating second. Tears blur her vision, but inside, the pain twists into resolve, the same ache you've buried in toxic relationships, pretending everything's fine. Pregnant and alone, Elena flees to her best friend's apartment, the viral video exploding online, his family's PR machine labeling her unstable. Yet, she's been the silent watcher all along, noting every suspicious wire transfer, every whispered call. This isn't just her story, it's the one you've lived in shadows. The ivory evening gown clung to Elena's 3-month pregnant body, accentuating delicate curves that only the sharpest eyes could discern. She stepped into the grand ballroom, where light from crystal chandeliers shimmered like stars in the California night sky, reflecting off the glossy marble floor. The air buzzed with polite laughter, the clink of champagne glasses, and the sophisticated blend of high-end perfume with the scent of fresh flowers from towering decorative vases. This was the playground of the elite Silicon Valley investors, with smiles as bright as toothpaste commercials and Malibu real estate moguls bragging about ocean view villas worth enough to buy a small town. Elena flashed a perfect smile, honed through hundreds of similar events, as she greeted familiar faces. There was the Santa Monica Art Gallery owner, always spinning tales of abstract paintings with the gravitas of someone revealing cosmic secrets, and the Palo Alto tech titan, whose conversations felt like a mini TED Talk, brimming with buzzwords like disruptive innovation and synergy. But behind that polished social mask, Elena sensed a creeping tension, like the eerie background score of a horror movie steadily rising in tempo. Alexander, her husband and CEO of Harrington Enterprises, had swiftly vanished into the sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns, leaving her alone at their assigned table. He was always like this, a whirlwind weaving through the crowd, gripping her arm just tightly enough to remind her who held control, before diving into business deals he called golden opportunities. The silent observer like Elena never missed the subtle details, the stray puzzle pieces others deemed harmless. She noticed the furtive glances of the assistant, Victoria Lang, a young woman with lustrous blonde hair, repeatedly darting her eyes toward the door leading to the rooftop terrace. Victoria lifted her glass with a faintly trembling hand, as if trying to conceal a secret too heavy to hold. Elena smiled inwardly. How ironic, she thought, that in a place where everyone pretended to be flawless, even a shaky hand could star in a Hollywood comedy script. Like, oops, I just spilled $1 million secret. But deeper down, those observations tightened her chest. Conversations around the table seemed to hush as she approached, replaced by forced smiles and abrupt pivots to LA's sunny weather, a subtle dodge, but to Elena, it rang like an alarm bell. The warm voice of her father, Miguel, echoed from distant memories, advice whispered during quiet Texas afternoons. Just breathe, my love, and observe. The truth always slips through the smallest cracks. Elena placed a protective hand on her belly, feeling the gentle stir of the life growing inside a quiet source of strength, reminding her she was no longer alone. A tense silence enveloped the air, like the morning fog in Malibu, obscuring the view but unable to hide the true outlines forever. 1 hour passed, then 2, and Alexander remained absent from their table, though Elena caught glimpses of him in the crowd, always moving toward the terrace with an oddly focused expression. Her stomach twisted, not from hunger or the strain of high heels, but from an instinct that had carried her through years as the perfect Mrs. Harrington, always watching from the wings. Finally, She followed that instinct. The path to the rooftop led her past tables laden with LA's finest delicacies, Russian caviar, sushi from a top Japanese chef, but the idle chatter and laughter around her seemed to dissolve with each step. Through floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the Los Angeles skyline sparkled with neon lights from the Hollywood Hills, a breathtaking scene now mocking the growing unease in her heart. She heard them before she saw them. Alexander's distinctive laugh mingling with a feminine giggle, making her hand tremble as she pushed open the glass door. The cool Pacific breeze swept in, carrying the sweet scent of orchids from the hotel gardens, a fragrance that would forever etch this moment into her memory. Under the shadow of a decorative trellis, her husband stood, his arms wrapped tightly around Victoria in her fiery red dress, their familiar intimacy making Elena's world tilt on its axis. The cool night breeze from the Pacific swept in like a deceitful whisper, carrying the sweet scent of orchids from the Beverly Wilshire Hotel's gardens, but to Elena, it was only the smell of betrayal, eternal and inescapable, a fragrance that would haunt her like the Hollywood noir films she once watched, where the protagonist always uncovered the truth in the least expected places. Under the romantic shadow of a decorative trellis, Alexander stood, his arms wrapped tightly around Victoria Lang in a fiery red dress, as vivid as a neon warning sign from Sunset Strip. Victoria, the young financial analyst he hired 3 months ago, who once brought coffee to their Beverly Hills mansion with a smile so fake Elena had thought, with a touch of irony, it could star in a toothpaste commercial flawless, yet full of chemicals. Now, that intimacy was laid bare, a familiar gesture that made Elena's blood boil, as if her heart were running a marathon with no finish line. Elena stood frozen at the threshold, the sea breeze threading through her hair, carrying a chill that seeped into her skin. But the real cold came from deep within the shattering of a world she had carefully built over 5 years of marriage. Alexander turned slowly, his face showing no surprise or shame, only a flicker of annoyance, as if interrupted during a crucial business meeting. Victoria stepped back, but her hand lingered on his arm, a subtle gesture of possession that made Elena feel like she was watching a dark comedy where the side character mistakenly thought she was the star. Elena stepped forward, her voice steadier than she expected, drawing strength from the unborn child stirring gently in her womb, a silent reminder that she was no longer fighting alone. The tension in the air was thick, sliceable with a knife, and Elena felt her heartbeat pounding chaotically, mingling with the distant crash of waves from Malibu shore. Her question hung in the air, drawing a small crowd near the terrace door, curious guests with phones at the ready, the click of recordings shattering the silence of the night like stones tossed into a still lake. Alexander's perfect mask cracked, his voice carrying the familiar dangerous calm, now laced with a simmering rage beneath. He stepped toward her, towering over Elena's petite frame, his words spilling out like sharp blades. Victoria understood what a man in his position needed: unquestioning support, not some martyr playing the victim, and she wasn't the first to provide it. Those words struck like invisible punches, prompting Elena to instinctively cradle her belly, shielding the innocent life from the storm of toxic venom. It was the darkest kind of humor in the heart of LA's elite, where people paid for therapy to avoid drama. The drama exploded right before their eyes. Then came the slap, sudden and unannounced, the crack of his palm against Elena's cheek echoing across the terrace, followed by gasps of shock from the crowd and the frantic clicking of more phones. Elena staggered back, her hand flying to her face, as tears blurred her vision, the stinging pain spreading not just across her skin but deep into her soul. Alexander growled, his composure fully shattered, his voice dripping with contempt, always pushing, always prying. She was nothing without him, nothing at all. Under the Los Angeles sky, twinkling with artificial stars from the Hollywood Hills, with dozens of witnesses and phones capturing the public humiliation, something inside Elena Ramirez changed forever. Years of being the silent wife, observing from the sidelines, crystallized into iron resolve, a quiet strength Alexander had never noticed. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her steps steady despite trembling legs, leaving the terrace before the tears truly fell. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number, her voice choked. She needed her parents in Los Angeles now. That moment, under the glow of the city that never sleeps, marked the start of a transformation from victim to the one who would lead the storm. The harsh morning light of Los Angeles streamed through the window of the small West Hollywood apartment where Elena Ramirez sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the thin silk pajamas from the night before, like the protagonist in a melancholic indie film that American audiences love to watch on quiet weekend evenings. Her cheeks still stung from the public slap on the Beverly Wilshire rooftop, a wound not just on her skin but etched deep into her soul, as if Hollywood itself had decided to film her drama without a script. Elena's phone buzzed incessantly, its screen lighting up with social media notifications, messages from her mother-in-law, Evelyn Harrington, and blazing headlines. Harrington scandal, CEO slaps pregnant wife. The video of the incident had gone viral overnight, thrusting her into the eye of a media storm, while Harrington Enterprises' stock plummeted like a blockbuster panned by critics. Elena stared at the screen, feeling as though the whole world was watching her crumble, and with a bitter irony, she thought how amusing, in a city where people pay for drama on the screen. Her real-life drama was free and viral. Lydia Thompson, her best friend from USC college days, stepped in with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, its gentle fragrance a feeble attempt to soothe the chaos. Lydia, with her tousled hair and the laid-back style of a West Hollywood artist, looked at Elena with eyes both worried and resolute. She set the tea down, her hand gently brushing Elena's shoulder, as if to say this tiny apartment was a safe haven amid the storm. Elena took a deep breath, her fingers unconsciously grazing her cheek, where Alexander's slap still left a stinging sensation. She whispered, her voice choked, that her parents, Miguel and Sofia Ramirez, were on their way from Texas to LAX, but her heart weighed heavy with an unspoken secret. They didn't yet know about the baby she carried. Just the thought of revealing the truth made her tremble, as if standing before a Hollywood camera without knowing her lines. When Miguel and Sofia entered the apartment, Miguel's tall, weathered frame and Sofia's familiar floral sweater brought the warmth of Texas Christmases. Sofia's arms wrapped tightly around Elena, her lavender scent like a sedative, pulling her back to childhood days when every problem could be solved with a hug. Elena choked up, tears finally spilling as she confessed about the unborn child. Sofia held her tighter, and in that silent moment, she shared a profound secret. Before meeting Miguel, she had been married to a man like Alexander, charming in public, but cruel behind closed doors. Her story of years spent enduring abuse, isolated from friends and family, and her escape to Cincinnati sparked a quiet fire in Elena. Sofia, with a resolute gaze, recounted the day she stood up, packed her bags, and reclaimed herself a story not on Netflix, but more inspiring than any film. That revelation pierced the fog in Elena's mind like a beam of light, transforming her silent observation into a resolve to act. She sat with her parents on Lydia's cramped sofa, the morning light illuminating the meticulous list she had written the night before, critical documents, external hard drives, and suspicious financial records she had secretly copied during afternoons when Alexander thought she was at yoga. How ironic, Elena thought, that while he was busy building his empire, she had inadvertently become an amateur detective, like a character in an LA edition of Law and Order. They planned to return to the Beverly Hills mansion to retrieve her belongings, Elena whispering as she pictured opening Alexander's safe. The silent observer notices everything. Miguel stood by the window, his towering figure like a shield ready to fend off any storm, while Sofia checked Lydia's tiny kitchen, brewing more tea, as if it were a familiar healing ritual. As the afternoon light faded, Elena felt a flicker of hope, fragile but unmistakable, like a studio spotlight flaring before the main scene. The documents she was about to retrieve were not just belongings, they were the keys to unlocking secrets darker than infidelity, secrets that Alexander and his family had concealed in the glamorous shadows of Hollywood. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. In the dim glow of attorney Rebecca Klein's office in downtown Los Angeles, Elena Ramirez sat between her parents, her hand gently cradling her pregnant belly as if holding onto a fragile promise. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline of downtown LA, but the glamorous view could not soothe the emotional storm swirling within her. The small room, filled with the scent of old paper and freshly brewed coffee, was an arena where Elena prepared to transform her silent observation into a sharp blade, slicing through the gilded facade of Harrington Enterprises. Rebecca, with her silver hair neatly tied back and eyes as piercing as a lawyer in a Hollywood courtroom drama, flipped through the pages of documents Elena had meticulously gathered. Financial records, external hard drives, and Victoria Lang's scrawled signatures on transfers through shell companies all painted a picture of systematic fraud, like the script of a corruption film that American audiences couldn't tear their eyes from. Elena smiled inwardly, a touch of bitter humor flickering through. She had skipped countless yoga sessions to photograph these documents, turning herself into an amateur spy in her own home, while Alexander thought she was just a harmless, pregnant housewife. Elena's silence was not passive. It was a weapon honed through months of noticing subtle signs. Alexander's evasive glances when his phone buzzed at midnight, his unusually prolonged business trips to San Francisco, and the way Victoria always appeared at the right moment with a smile so fake it could star in a cosmetics ad. On those Friday afternoons, when LA's sunlight streamed through the Beverly Hills mansion's windows, Elena had quietly snapped photos of each document, her hands trembling but her mind razor-sharp, like a character in Erin Brockovich, but without the low-cut blouse to draw attention. Now, sitting across from Rebecca, she drew strength from her unborn child, each gentle kick a reminder that she was fighting for both of them. Her father, Miguel, sat to her left, his calloused hands clenched, as if ready to smash any obstacle, while her mother, Sophia, gently stroked Elena's hand, her eyes gleaming with the resolve of someone who had survived her own marital hell and emerged stronger. An unexpected text lit up Elena's phone, interrupting her thoughts. Victoria Lang, the woman in the fiery red dress from the rooftop, sent a brief message. Offshore accounts. And a request to meet. Elena's heart clenched, memories of the public slap and Alexander's cruel confession cutting like an unhealed wound. But as she read the message, she realized a painful truth. Victoria was also a victim, ensnared in Alexander's web of manipulation, just as Elena had once been. With reluctant but resolute determination, Elena agreed to let Victoria testify in exchange for immunity, a decision that felt like signing a pact with the devil but was necessary to dismantle Alexander's empire. Rebecca, with a discreet smile like a chess grandmaster, emphasized that the baby changed everything in the prenuptial agreement, a legal ace Alexander hadn't anticipated. Elena felt a spark of hope, like a Hollywood spotlight flaring before the climactic scene. Outside, Evelyn's PR team spread rumors through tabloids, labeling Elena as unstable due to hormones, a classic LA elite tactic to smear those who dared to challenge them. Elena, gripping a cold coffee cup, smiled at the irony. How amusing, she thought, that the world saw her as weak when she held all the receipts to topple an empire. With her parents' support, she moved to a small apartment in Midtown Los Angeles, where the afternoon light was softer, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. Elena started work at Bennett Builders, a startup led by Carol Bennett, who saw potential in her determined gaze. Miguel and Sophia stayed nearby, turning the apartment into a warm haven where the aroma of Lydia's chamomile tea and her parents' laughter wove a symphony of healing. Each night, Elena reviewed the documents, arranging them like a director prepping for the final shot, knowing the SEC was poised to deliver the decisive blow. The blazing sunlight from the SEC office in San Francisco streamed through towering glass windows, illuminating every line of text on Elena Ramirez's documents, as if California's sunshine itself were exposing the dark secrets of Harrington Enterprises. The modern room, with its white walls and the scent of printer ink from the photocopier, felt like a Hollywood soundstage where the climactic scene was being staged, but this time there was no scripted pretense. Investigator Robert Chen, lean but with eyes as sharp as a detective in a noir film, flipped through the pages Elena had painstakingly collected, his fingers pausing at notes about the Harrington Charity Fund. Elena sat across from him, her hand resting lightly on her pregnant belly, feeling the strong kicks of her child like a silent cheer, while memories of the slap on the Beverly Wilshire rooftop stung like a recurring scene in her mind. She had turned her silent observation into a razor-sharp weapon, and now it was aimed directly at the heart of Alexander Harrington's empire. Those documents were more than just papers. They were pieces of a sophisticated money laundering scheme where the Harrington Charity Fund, with its lavish galas at five-star hotels, served as a front to funnel millions into offshore accounts. Elena recalled the events she had attended, where wealthy guests clapped for philanthropic spirit while donated funds vanished like smoke on Hollywood Boulevard. How ironic, she thought, that all of Los Angeles saw her as just a pregnant wife on the sidelines while she was documenting every detail like a screenwriter crafting the finale of a hit drama series. Robert Chen, with quiet admiration, confirmed her evidence was airtight, from suspicious transactions to Victoria Lang's signatures, the woman who once stood in Alexander's arms on the rooftop. Each line of text was a bullet, poised to bring down the empire that Alexander and his mother, Evelyn, had built on a foundation of lies. Outside, at Harrington Enterprises headquarters in downtown LA, the company's stock plummeted like a disaster movie no one wanted to watch, with panicked investors pulling out funds. Evelyn, in an expensive business suit, held a press conference in front of the gleaming glass building, trying to control the damage with a confident smile but eyes betraying raw panic. She accused Elena of being a vengeful wife acting out over personal issues, but an LA Times reporter, microphone raised high, exposed the truth. Elena was the whistleblower, backed by undeniable evidence. In that moment, Victoria Lang, now an SEC witness, revealed the final detail that shattered everything. Evelyn, not Alexander, was the mastermind behind the shady transactions, willing to sacrifice her son to protect her empire. With bitter irony, Elena thought the entire Harrington family had cast themselves as the villains in a movie they thought they starred in. Meanwhile, Alexander, facing the threat of prison, chose the least painful path, testifying against his mother for leniency. He signed the divorce agreement in a San Francisco law office, granting Elena full custody and a fair share of assets, his eyes vacant, as if his starring role had been cut from the script. Elena, from her new office at Bennett Builders in Midtown Los Angeles, watched the news on her laptop screen, feeling her baby kick hard as if applauding her mother's victory. That evening, in the small apartment her parents had rented nearby, the scent of Sophia's chamomile tea and Miguel's warm laughter enveloped her like a comforting blanket. Elena gazed out the window, where LA's lights twinkled like stars, and felt a rare sense of peace. She hadn't sought destruction, only to let the truth shine, like a stage spotlight illuminating every dark corner. Evelyn received a 15-year sentence, her face on the news resembling a dethroned queen, while Alexander vanished somewhere on the West Coast, perhaps trying to rewrite his story in a rundown bar. Elena, her hand resting on her belly, knew her journey wasn't over. The gentle morning sunlight slipped through the nursery's curtains in the Midtown Los Angeles apartment, bathing the room in a warm golden hue, as if Hollywood itself were flipping on the stage lights for the final scene of an inspiring film. Elena Ramirez, 9 months pregnant, sat on an oak rocking chair, her hands softly stroking her belly, feeling the strong movements of her child like a promise of a brighter future. She named her daughter Aurora Dawn, a name that symbolized a new beginning, like light chasing away the darkness of the days when she was the silent wife in the Beverly Hills mansion. The small room, with the scent of fresh paint and the woody aroma from the handcrafted crib her father, Miguel, had meticulously built, stood as a symbol of a life Elena had built with her own hands, no longer reliant on the false glamour of Alexander Harrington. How ironic, she thought, that all of Los Angeles once saw her as a victim on the news, and now she was rewriting her own script, like a Hollywood producer crafting a happy ending. Each day, Elena stepped out of the apartment with newfound confidence, like a protagonist entering the final shot of an Oprah-produced film. She joined the board of a women's shelter in downtown LA, where pale gray walls and the aroma of coffee blended to create a healing space for those who, like her mother Sophia, had endured abuse. Elena shared her story from the public slap on the rooftop to her journey of turning silent observation into a powerful voice, with women whose eyes held both fear and a yearning for hope. Each story she told was a brick in a bridge, helping them find their voices, and each responding smile was a small victory, like quiet applause in an empty movie theater. Her resilience, forged through long nights reviewing documents and days battling Evelyn's PR team, now became a torch lighting the way for others. At Bennett Builders, Elena rose to become Chief Operating Officer, a role she once thought was reserved for men like Alexander in the glittering boardrooms of downtown LA. Carol Bennett, the company's founder, saw in Elena not just talent but a steadfast flame, like the light from a lighthouse guiding through a storm. How ironic, Elena thought, that she was once called unstable due to hormones, yet now she managed construction projects with the precision of a Hollywood director filming an action scene. An unexpected friendship with Victoria Lang, once a shadow in her nightmare, blossomed over coffee at a small cafe near Venice Beach. Victoria, now freelancing and free from Harrington Enterprises' shadow, shared stories of Alexander's manipulation, helping Elena realize they had both been pawns in his game. Those conversations, laced with the sound of ocean waves and the salty scent of the sea, were a healing balm no script could capture. Aurora was born on a radiant morning. As LA's sunlight poured through the windows of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, her deep brown eyes sparkling like her mother's, as if carrying the light of dawn itself. Miguel and Sophia stood there, silent tears falling as they held their granddaughter, their arms a fortress shielding Elena from painful memories. A year later, Elena gazed at a family photo hung on the apartment wall, where Aurora's smile was the center of all light. The Harrington Fund, once a front for crime, was now restructured into a legitimate charity under independent oversight, like a film remade with a kinder ending. Elena, sitting beside Aurora, whispered that the silent have the strongest voice, a reminder that truth always finds a way to shine, no matter how long it's been hidden. Elena's story is a flame of inspiration, like a movie theater's lights that never dim, calling on those who are silent to stand up and let truth lead the way. If this story touches you, like, share, and subscribe to explore more journeys of turning pain into power. But dear friend, ask yourself, what flame does your silence hide, and how will you let it blaze?